Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with Robert Fry.
And today we have on a special guest. His name is Max Bay. He's a bioinformatician who publishes a lot on the Twitter world in baseball research, specifically stuff like Stuff Plus, which is how good a pitcher's arsenal is, Location Plus, how well they locate their pitches, and then Pitching Plus, which is a combination of the two. And he really delves into kind of how he does his research and what are some intricacies of it. A lot of analytical talk, which really fires me up.
So I actually saw some stuff that Max was doing, and I really wanted to get him on the podcast to talk about how that might relate to some of the stuff that we talk about from an ecological approach and how we can integrate statistics and some of the investigation and analysis that Max has been doing into how we could apply an ecological approach to the game. And so we had a good conversation. Max is really astute and really understands statistics and the scientific method. And we had a really great conversation and him kind of explaining some of the nuances of his positions and his findings. So I really hope you guys enjoy today's podcast with Max Bay.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
All right. Max, super excited. Glad to have you on. I guess I don't, other than seeing you on Twitter, I don't know a whole lot about you. Do you want to kind of give us a little bit of background? I've seen your Twitter bio, and that's got me really curious. So I first want to just kind of open the floor and just kind of see how you want to describe yourself before I ask some more specific questions.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, guys. This is always fun to, join people that are interested, or join conversation with people that are interested in this sort of analytic approach to baseball. But I guess my background is that I don't have a very strong baseball background. I am a PhD candidate very near the end of my time in grad school, where I'm studying gene expression in neural stem cells. And I do just the computational and sort of what they call bioinformatic side of things, where there are others in the lab who generate and then acquire data. And it's this very high dimensional data. So I guess that means it's like there are thousands of genes, and you're looking at sort of the expression of all of them and how those different genes interact with each other to make cells behave in certain ways. And anyway, my job is to analyze that stuff, and my PhD is in that space. But there is a natural, I think, bridge between any sort of statistics-based work and baseball. You could take the things you've learned in one area and apply it to other areas, but because baseball has so many different I guess components or features to it and different granularities, you could investigate things at the level of individual pitches, individual plays, or the at bat or whole game or whatever. You can take some of the things that that you've learned from one field and then kind of try to understand the other one with it. But anyway, I liked baseball as a kid, but I honestly didn't love it. And then grew to love it as an adult. And my interest in it sort of went in parallel with my professional growth. And the more like I became a bioinformatician, the more I was like, oh man, I got to apply this more and more to baseball. So I started downloading data, and then the first thing I tried to do is just like replicate FIP, from raw at bat outcomes. And then it was like replicate Fangraphs WAR, and which was just trying to like redo stuff, but from from scratch, basically. And then it kind of grew into like my own types of analyses. Wow, this went on way too long. anyway, that's kind of my, yeah, well, that's sort of the story. Basically, I continued to like baseball more and more as I got into, the underlying, like a scientific understanding of how the game works, and the two kind of went hand in hand. And yeah,
Now,
and that was it.
oh, that fires me up, Max. Oh man.
Sweet.
What kind of led you down to this baseball rabbit hole, more or less? Was it um, kind of the principles of being a bioinformatician? I don't know if I'm saying that right. But what is it, the kind of like what you learned while you were in school, or was it just, hey, I have baseball data now let's try something?
Um, you know, sometimes I'm asked, what's a good way to learn how to program? And I think that the best way to learn how to program is to first have a problem that you'd like to solve using code. Because without the motivation to accomplish a particular goal, then the learning is superficial. It has no underlying drive behind it. And I think that's sort of the thing with baseball. So my first interest was, and I know this sounds goofy, but it was to replicate FIP, then XFIP, and then I just went on and on. I at one point replicated Sierra, and then Fangraphs WAR from the data that's available. And it was, can I, from first principles, reconstruct the same values? And I knew in doing that, I would gain an understanding of why it works the way it does. And so for me, the goal was I want to understand these numbers. What are the guts within them? And the best way to do that, I felt, was to make it kind of from scratch. And I just read the description of it, and they don't have mathematical formulae, but they have like long paragraphs describing how it's done, and just turn that into code basically. And then there were questions about luck in baseball and parks and these different components that drive outcomes. And I wanted to get a sense of what this different sort of what's it called, like sources of variance are. And so I remember I built a model at one point that it was just like an XHR model. It was a generalized additive model for predicting, the probability of a home run given the launch angle, the spray angle, and the exit velocity. And the idea was at first it was like, what is Alex Bregman doing? Like, how is he hitting all these home runs? And it turns out that a big part of it is that he pulls the balls at an elite level. And I didn't understand that at first. I didn't really get it, but using these models to help explain some different aberrations, different surprising outcomes. Yeah, and then it was much more granular. It was like, what makes for a good pitcher? Because it's such a Gordian's knot. And there are so many different ways to be an effective pitcher. And that's what led me to Stuff Plus and Pitching Plus and Location Plus. It was this this itch I needed to scratch. Like, what the hell makes a good pitcher? I know there are some things that are common between pitchers, some things that are unique about them, and then different interactions between different things, like your release height, of course, the velocity, but then also the spin, then the spin axis, certain, of course, non-Magnus effects and stuff like that. And it was like building a model to help grade pitches, to see what makes for a good pitch. Because the nice thing about having a model is you're not just looking at the raw data anymore. You can tweak inputs to the model and then see what the model tells you is good or bad. And so you're sort of simulating, changes to a pitcher or whatever. So That's what it was. It was trying to understand these things in baseball that sometimes like we chalk up to like they are clutch or they're deceptive or they're these seeming intangibles that are maybe actually rooted in something tangible. And yeah, that was sort of it.
So, what kind of languages do you use to do your analysis?
Almost everything's done in R these
Okay.
days. Yeah, I know Robert's a big fan.
Big fan. Love it.
Yeah.
And then what do you model? Like what are some of the models that you use? I know there are like different types that you can use to help you basically model the data. So what are a few of the ways that you analyze it? You know, for example, are you using machine learning? And I know there's several different types of machine learning that you can use. Yeah, what kind of ways do you create
You know,
models?
to the extent that it's possible, I try to keep the model framework itself as simple as possible. So I would say that it depends on the question I'm asking.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm looking for a linear relationship or just some sort of relationship between one variable, like the independent variable and the dependent variable, you start with a linear model, or like almost always, especially if you only have two variables, the dependent and the independent. And if it's not that, then I'll add things. I'll make it a bit more complex. If it's, like 2 or 3 variables, generalized additive models can be very useful, especially if all 3 are continuous. So spray angle, launch angle, and exit velocity are great, for a GAM. If you're looking for essentially like logic probabilities, like if you're looking to compute the probability of different events occurring, especially if you don't have too many events. So it was great for, I have a my own xwoba that takes three variables, launch angle, spray angle, and exit velocity, whereas Savants is just launch angle and exit velocity, my understanding. And I'm running it through again. Pitching Plus and those models, that is a more sophisticated machine learning tool, and it's using something called extreme gradient boosting, which is I mean, it's basically this giant decision tree, and you put in inputs, and it tells you what the probability of landing at different outputs are, basically. So in this I have I think 15 different events that could occur as a consequence of each pitch, depending on the count. And yeah, basically what this model is doing is so I call it pitching plus, but the guts of it, it's actually a classifier. And what it's doing is it's saying, what's the probability given, this velocity, this spin axis, this amount of movement, all the other, pitch features that I've put into it. What's the probability that that this is a ball, that this is a swinging strike, that this is a called strike, that this is hit on the ground, that this is hit in the air, things like that. And then each one of those has then its own run value that I've calculated separately. And so, yeah, like I said, it depends on the problem. I mean, pitching is so complicated that you need sort of a complicated model, I think, to be able to capture it in interesting ways. But yeah, if it's simple, I try to stay simple.
So can you tell me more, like what was it, pitching plus? Like what is that trying to tell you?
So on Savant, each pitcher has this sort of summary of the run value for each of their pitches. And run value is, so if you have a run value across the board of 0, that means that you are a perfectly average pitcher, because you aren't, by throwing certain pitches, changing the expected run probability in ways that would increase the number of runs. It's kind of weird, but basically before every pitch, there's an expected number of runs as a consequence of delivering that pitch, and that's context dependent. So you have, if you've got a runner at third and no outs, what's the run value? What's the expected number of runs? I think it's, I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think it's something like, it depends on the number of outs too. But it's like, let's say 70.75, you'd expect 0.75 runs after that pitch, or something like that. I'm probably way off. I don't remember the exact numbers, but anyway, that's how much you'd expect. But if at the end of that, there no runs came in, then you've now accrued negative run value, which is good for a pitcher. You want negative runs. And so what the model is doing is, actually, let me take a step back. So what's happening in reality is that pitchers and you can see this on the Savant page, they have the accumulated run value for all of their pitches, and they have the total amount, and then they also have the per 100 pitches value. And it's a good thing to be less than 0. My goal was to not assess what the run value of the pitches observed. It's to take the features of that pitch and say what should have happened. So what should have, if you've got a 3-2 count and you've got a runner and you've got bases loaded, okay, and then you throw the pitch and it's like slightly out of the zone, but it's not 100% out of the zone. You don't have a 100% chance that it's going to get called a ball. It's like maybe 60%. So what it's doing is one run will come in if it's called a ball, but then if you throw it in the zone, there's a chance it gets hit. So that could be like 3 runs. It could be 2 runs. I don't know. It could be 4 if a home run's hit. So depending on the particular context, you have different outcomes that could happen. In Pitching Plus, what it's doing is it's saying, well, screw the context. What's the average number of runs that come in on a home run? What's the average number of runs that come in on a single? What's the average number of runs suppressed if you get an out here, either through a ground out or through a strikeout? So all these different possible events. And what it's doing is it's saying, okay, I don't know what the context, like the base state context or the count state context is. What is just on average the run value of a pitch that's thrown 100 miles an hour with 20 inches of vertical movement, that's located at the top of the zone? It's a good value, right? And what's the run value of a 90 mile an hour fastball thrown right down the middle? And its job is to basically say, on average, if you were to throw this infinite number of times, what percentage of time would these different outcomes happen? And then I assign average run value in a context neutral environment to them. And then what you have is the expected run value. So it's because you don't know what the context is going to be in the future for a pitcher. It's just saying, if you throw these pitches infinite number of times, and they landed it exactly at these places, what would happen if you played infinite number of games? And so that's basically what that's trying to estimate. And I know the reason I call it plus is because it's like, it's like the other plus stats that are mean centered around 100, and anything above 100 is better than average as a pitcher. Anything below is less than average. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm like rambling on, but there's just a lot going on.
We love it.
Yeah. Well, and two, part of what got me really interested in some of your stuff was one of the themes of the podcast is trying to figure out how to marry an ecological approach to skill acquisition or behavior and analytics. And so even though you had stripped out the context to run this one scenario, the fact that you were looking at the context as part of your analysis, to me, that kind of squares really well with an ecological approach, because in an ecological approach, we believe that the context really shapes the behavior. And so, can we use analytics to help us understand the context and the potential behaviors that come out of that context? And then, can we use that to help us in our practice design and our player development to help players become to have the desired outcomes in those different scenarios? And so that's why I'm kind of like super curious, like, okay, how do you actually look at things that are context dependent? Or because one of the other concepts is looking for invariants, or essentially like what are the common things that are constants, even though there's lots of change. What is a consistent thing that doesn't really vary much,
Right.
or that's constant throughout all the different contexts. And so it sounds to me that's what you were trying to look for in the analysis that you ran with Pitching Plus.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a misunderstanding by some that I've developed something that looks very granularly at specific events. Actually, even though it's calculated on the pitch per pitch level, it's a very much a bird's eye view. It's sort of like XWOBA in that it just essentially says, without knowing anything about where the fielders were, which XWOBA doesn't, what would in the average park, what would you expect to get? And this just helps you, I think, kind of find certain like major league underachievers that are doing something that should achieve results over, at the majors. It should achieve results, but maybe just hasn't. And so there are certain relievers, for instance, that really popped on this. Like Paul Sewald from day freaking one was a huge, huge favorite of Pitching Plus. It loved him. And it actually liked him last year too, but I think he lowered his arm slot or something, and the grader liked that, the pitch grader. So yeah, it kind of just like flags like this person's doing something that should achieve good results. Why? Like the underlying mechanisms of what's happening. It doesn't really, like, you have to go and kind of dig in and do the investigation. I didn't build like a way to peer into the black box, into the model. And that's kind of the fun part. I'll see somebody who looks like maybe they're not getting great results, but they should be. And you can go see either why, or just wait until they do because you trust the model to have less error over time. But when it comes to context and the mentality of the player, I think that's what this is missing. It doesn't know any of that stuff. It doesn't know about deception. It doesn't know where you're putting your glove. It doesn't know what your timing is. It's so, yeah, I mean, one of the areas I'm excited to explore eventually, maybe if I have time, is people who chronically over and under achieve the predicted values, and maybe looking to see what it is about those particular pitchers that make them over or underachieve.
So, because you work with biology, there we go. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Because you work with biology, and oftentimes biology is a complex system, how analytically, how do you try to navigate that, since things in a complex system aren't always linear, or oftentimes are very nonlinear?
I think you have to appreciate the complexity, and also know that as I would say, outsider for the moment, who does not interact with baseball on a day-to-day basis, who knows nothing about the training regimens that these players are going through or their prep work, that I'm missing a ton of information. And so when I run analyses and there's an outcome or some result, some finding, it should open up additional questions. It should basically, like any analysis worth its weight, is going to beg additional inquiries. So for me, the complexity emerges. The scale of the complexity becomes apparent as you dive deeper and deeper. And I think, one Gordian knot that so many people have struggled to quantitate somehow is game calling. To me, it seems just like a very complex psychological game that you're playing as a catcher. And I frankly don't even, it's so many things at once. It's knowing which pitches a pitcher has that day. It's seeing where the weaknesses are, not just in terms of location, but where they're swinging, where they're, like, all that stuff that's like in flux. And, appreciating that there are complexities like that kind of everywhere in this game. So I guess my answer is just know it's there. That's how I deal with it. Don't try to ignore it.
Now, you bring up a good point in terms of complexity, because there is, in baseball, and this is what I love about it, is there's always that level of complexity. But we as analysts try our best to kind of simplify as much as possible. Where in your case, it's pitching plus, location plus, stuff plus, to try to just simplify it and boil it down to a single number. Because on the coaching side, it's very hard to simplify it. Because there's, in my experience, there's a bunch of coaches that are like thinking, a million thoughts at once about this, that, and the other thing. Whereas this is where analysts can come in and be like, hey, let's boil it down to simply this and say, hey, this is what we like. And this is how I can show you. And kind of going even further back, we can even say, like, the fun part about running these type of models, etc., is you always find someone new to love. And I mean, in your case, with pitching plus, like Paul Sewald is like the new awesome guy because, hey, your model says he's great. And I think that's the beauty of it, because we're not trying to sit here and say, oh, we're running all these numbers, it's going to make everybody worse. No, we're trying to on one side, develop players, which is kind of the coaching player development side. On the analyst side is saying, well, sometimes coaches aren't really seeing this visually, because granted, coaches can see a lot visually, but at the same time, we can say, well, if we look at these numbers, actually, he's doing pretty well, but he's not getting results.
And I think too, the way that I look at analytics is it helps us figure out where we should focus, and where to look. I mean, one of the big ideas too, even in an ecological approach, even for an athlete, is talking about their search process and their ability to find important information. And I look at analytics as being the thing that kind of helps us know where to look for the important stuff and in what area to search. And so that's kind of how I view this stuff, and why I think it's important to marry analytics with the coaching side, and like there should be a good reciprocal relationship there.
Yeah, I don't think there's a point to analytics beyond just the academic pursuit of it, unless there's some sort of actionable information at the end of the pipeline. Like if you develop some model that perfectly describes outcomes of particular batted ball events or whatever, and it has a very, not perfectly, but like a very low degree of error. What the hell are you going to do with that information? Who cares? Maybe that's cool for you. But how can it be used to improve players or how can it be used to in the service of development, in the service of improvement, is one piece of the puzzle. But I think that the thing that like my image of what a lot of R&D groups are doing for teams is finding new inefficiencies. And just saying, like, I think this player is undervalued, they could just be moved over to this position or whatever, and get their bat in the lineup. Maybe they're just not, like, I don't know, maybe not, stop trying to hit so hard or whatever it is. It's usually not that. It's usually just try to hit it harder. But those two things can I think they end up, I think, potentially using the same information. Like, it's basically advanced scouting on the one end, and then on the other end, it's using information to maybe inform certain tweaks. Like, one of the ideas I had with Pitching Plus was, well, what if you took a pitcher and then modified some things just like a little bit, maybe change their arm angle a little bit in the simulation, and see how, given the same kind of arm speed or similar arm speed, like similar velocity, similar spin, what sort of movement would you expect? And then how would that movement impact hitters, ability to hit the ball, or make good contact? So I think that can be done, but it's like, I'm sure some teams are doing that, but there has to be good interaction with the analyst and then the coaches. I think
There absolutely has to be. And then you kind of alluded to it a bit earlier, but you were talking about how, like, most of teams are finding like an inefficiency. Now, this doesn't have to be like related to like baseball. This could be like your own work with baseball stuff. But what do you think is an inefficiency, either in the game of baseball or from the analyst coach perspective, something along those lines?
I don't know. I'm not in it enough to really comment on that in any intelligent way, frankly. I do get a sense that there's a pretty significant disparity in I guess I'd say, like, the percent of coaches, trainers, and other development folks who are in on the R&D type approach. Like, there are some teams with, like, probably not that many people that seem receptive to suggestions from R&D. Like, I don't know what's going on in Colorado.
Fair.
And that's not a player usage inefficiency so much as just a systems, operation inefficiency. You need key stakeholders to have buy-in, I think. And it's so obvious that some teams just don't. But when it comes to other things, like, there are some advanced teams that seem to have just figured out so many things. What we're trying to do now, sometimes as analysts, is just reverse engineer what they're doing. It used to be that the public domain was where the innovation occurred, basically all of it, and then those people all got hired by teams. Not all of them, but many of them got hired by teams, and now, because they have so much more information, like, within house, the innovation seems to largely occur behind a curtain, and it's like, we're trying to figure out what's going on here, like, and so I don't know. there are probably some things that teams think are inefficient that one team does and another team doesn't. You know?
Yeah, and it could be on a team by team basis. I'm curious to see it because yeah, you brought it up. Like there can be that big disparity, and on the other side of like there's this level of confirmation bias where the analyst wants to be able to say something, but at the same time, like the coach only wants to hear something that he's doing that he knows he's doing right. So it's more or less saying, "Hey, analyst, like do X model or look up X thing and see if I'm right." Then if I'm wrong, well, well the model's bad. Well, it's not this. Well, it's not that.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like there has to be continuity between the two. And that's what I think is just so hard nowadays is being able to just present. I mean, you do such a great job of it um, in the Twitter world where like you explain your points definitely. And I know you've alluded to it a few times, but like whenever you make very thoughtful, thought condescending posts on any of your metrics, pitching plus, location plus, stuff plus, and then any other baseball stuff like got a lot of great content out there. Um, you don't get that much reception, but then if you make a silly tweet, you get much more reception there. Um,
Hundreds
but
there's like 100-fold difference, no joke.
yeah, it's like, well, but being able to, I think at the end of the day, just being able to communicate is just huge
Yeah.
in anything. And just having that is just a key ingredient to be able to operate efficiently.
I try to be humble, not for its own sake, but because I know that there's an enormous amount that I am not incorporating into my model that I must have not thought through. And there's an enormous amount that the model simply could never capture. And so I think the domain expertise of coaches and of players is as valuable to me as learning new techniques, making more sophisticated models. Without one, you don't have the other. And so, to my mind, like the best, and I mean, I have very little experience with this. Like I've spoken with some players who've reached out to me, and I always let them know, you are not a number, but this is what it says. And to the extent that that's useful, this is what it means. And I've had those sorts of interactions before, but first of all, those are players seeking me out, and so they are already receptive. And second of all, like I haven't had the experience of sort of having the full pipeline of me to coach to player, but I can appreciate that when I'm putting things together, if people are going to understand it and like it, you gotta be honest about what information is not there and what you think the limitations are, and then also just be open to concerns. I've got a pitching plus used to not consider count, for instance. Sorry, location, actually both location plus and pitching plus. Location plus really needs count because the run value of different regions of the zone changes with count. Like in a 3-0 count, totally different than a 2-0 count, right? Like you can't throw a freaking ball on a 3-0 count, but you can totally throw a ball on an 0-2 count. And it doesn't make that much a difference. It'll change the outcome massively. So anyway, so it was stupid, a simple thing that was. I heard somebody, I had a few people suggest I incorporate it, and I did, and I'm glad I did.
I really love that point, though, that you're not a number. I think that's something that, especially players, but I mean, even coaches sometimes forget that players aren't just numbers. And this is kind of where I was going to at that one point about like dealing with complex systems and biological beings being complex systems is you don't just because like to use an example that you had given, like just because you lower somebody's arm slot you hope that all these other variables stay constant, so that by doing that, you actually can get a better outcome. But maybe in changing their arm slot, it will change the tilt and the spin and how they're able to impart force on the ball. And then
Totally.
that drastically will change how the type of pitch that they're able to throw. And so it might not actually work out. But at the same point, the whole reason to have the analytics is to be like, hey, we could try, this is something we could try, and let's see how this works. Like, because to me, especially if it can get you close to the ballpark, and again, this is to me educating where you're going to do your search. You may actually stumble upon something that's much better, that is maybe one standard deviation different from what you are initially looking at.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, and if the suggestion can happen, or if it can be generated from these simulations, from the model, then I think if you have a good relationship, either through the coach to the player or directly to the player, or whatever the case may be, but if that relationship's there and that trust there, then they're more willing to try out that thing. And I need to say over and over again, or should say over and over again, I'm not a coach. I haven't although I'll be starting for a team soon, I don't work for one now.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
yeah, no, I'm starting in November.
Well, that's awesome. Sometimes we what is it? Debut things here first on Finding the Edge. Like, for example,
That's right.
a couple episodes ago, we debuted that Robert interned at Driveline, although he didn't say anything the entire summer. But it took us the entire summer to also air that episode.
Yeah.
But so sometimes people
funny.
get to hear things first here. So that's kind of cool. I don't know if you've said that before,
Right.
but
yeah, the plan
Yeah.
was to go more public with it as the date approached. But yeah, I'm starting November 1st with the Houston Astros.
okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I was wondering if
that's
it,
big.
Well, what I meant to say was not that.
Yeah.
But it was that, I have very little experience with translating information to players. I have essentially none. And so I can't really speak on that from experience. But, I've always tried to make what I write accessible to, anybody who's interested in it, irrespective of your understanding of like models and stuff.
Well, and that was one of the things that I thought is super important that you laid out there, was that most people don't let people know the limitations of what they're presenting. Like, and I think that's one thing that we need to do more, is be more honest and upfront with people about like how far things can go. So, for example, my background is in strength and conditioning, and I think a lot of people have in an effort to market their services, have made it seem like this is the end all be all of getting better or throwing harder or whatever. And
Right.
there are some limitations there to what you can actually get done from a strength and conditioning standpoint. And sometimes you have to help people understand what the limitations are and what they can really benefit and get from it. Because I've seen plenty of kids go way too overboard with the lifting, thinking that will make them better on the field, and realizing that they're actually only getting better at lifting, and they actually need to spend more time on the skill work. And so that's where I really appreciate that you understand and can also let players know, like, hey, again, you're not a number. Here's what this is pointing to. Here's where you can again search for a better solution to improve your game. But this isn't, don't overly fixate on this one thing. Understand its limitations. Basically a Bruce Lee quote: absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and then add what is uniquely your own. And so that's what I loved about your comment. I wanted to throw that on to what you had said there.
Well, like, look at Logan Webb for example. If you look at on a per pitch basis, his pitches are the same. He's not doing very much different that I can tell. I mean, I think there have been some videos sort of reviewing his release mechanics, and maybe it's different, maybe it's not. My understanding is he hasn't really said anything about that. But what he started doing was just throwing his freaking sinker more. because his sinker's great. And even though we live in a four-seamer world, we don't live in a four-seamer world. We live in a world where four-seamers have additional cash, maybe more cachet, but because of his arm angle and because of the type of spin he has, because of the way his grip on the ball, and the way his arm, his wrist pronates and everything, he's getting he's getting good seam shifted wake movement from it, and he's getting decent horizontal movement on it, and so this pitch is nasty. He throws that. He throws the changeup. He's the same pitcher who throws his sinker more, and now he's got like a 2 whatever ERA. And it doesn't look like a fluke. This kid looks great, and you can all guarantee somebody built a model like this over in San Francisco. Most teams, I think, have these sort of pitch graders, and they said, "Oh man, dude, you gotta throw that thing more." And he did, and it worked. But maybe it won't sometimes. And so, if you look month over month, you could see the increase with the sinker usage, right, from what I remember. And I think that's what happens. They buy more and more into the ideas. They see the results.
Right. It's more or less more results driven than it is process driven. Because they're like, well, hey, it's working. All right, no, it's not, from an analyst perspective, it's not, hey, go work on these ideas. It's more or less, hey, let's try this one idea. If it works, great. All right, you get another idea. But if it doesn't, well, we're gonna try to figure out something else. But we're not gonna get these big ideas.
If you're not resistant to, if you have some even modicum of faith in the analytics belief in you, and then the coach's belief in you and the belief in that pitch, that should help propel your own confidence in whatever adjustment you like to make. So the results are necessary at a certain point, and they probably drive the additional usage. But if you're sitting there thinking, like, coach loves this pitch, analytics loves this pitch, I like this pitch, you start throwing it more, start getting more strikeouts with it, or whatever your results you hope to get out of it, and then it's a synergy of those things, and then you believe in it even more.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love that we just incorporated the mental side of the game into this. Turning analytics into an art, part of the art of coaching.
Got to be there, man.
You know that Yogi Berra says, right? 90% of the game is mental. The other half is physical.
Yep.
I just believe so many of these things that people said about how the game operates are probably true in ways we don't understand. I mean, it's funny that late movement is now called seam shifted wake, but how long have you heard about late movement in a pitch? Forever. And now there's a physical process by which it is understood to occur. And but I think I'm humbled by the just the sheer volume of time people have spent playing this game. You have to understand that those things are important.
But I think you bring up a good point there we don't need to be antagonistic, new school versus old school, because some of the new school stuff is just helping us better understand the old school stuff and why it works. And then in my view, it helps us to know where we should spend more time doing some of that old school stuff that was working. Like, we should do that more. And so I think, I look at especially the stuff with ecological dynamics as not necessarily, because I think even in talking with other coaches, they sometimes don't like how people have talked about it, myself included, of being like, this is some brand new thing. Like, a lot of times this is old stuff, and now we have a better appreciation for things that we've been doing in the past, and it will help us do more of those things and less of the things that we've been doing in the past that weren't so helpful. And so that's something that I think we need to remember, either on the analytics side or on the skill acquisition side, you don't necessarily need to present it as this new awesome thing. Instead, this is a thing that helps complement things that we already do and that we've already known for a long time, and just helps us do those things better. One of the other things that one of the posts that you had that got me really interested was this question that you had, because I think it's a question that also pairs well with an ecological approach. Can hitting performances be predicted by the quality of pitches seen? And I almost wonder too, that's kind of baked into there, the quantity of pitches seen. Like, and it seemed like you were kind of looking into this. What were some of the findings that you found by examining that question?
Well, I have this pitch grader that gives a grade for individual pitches. Now, the assumption in general for a hitter who's played a full season and faced however many hundreds of pitchers is that the average quality, if you just average across pitches, the average quality of each pitch is the same across batters. Like the batters are seeing the same quality pitches once you add it all up. First, that's an assumption that I wanted to evaluate and validate, and then I wanted to see if batters indeed do see different qualities of pitches, does that actually predict the on the season outcome for them? And so first, what I did was look at basically the average, not individual pitch quality, but I basically looked at the average pitch quality for a pitcher, and then said, okay, let's assume, and I like the units I used for this were run value, where smaller numbers are better, or less than 0 is good. Better, less than 0 is better than average. And what I found from that was that if you just take the on the season average of a pitcher and then assume that whatever pitch a hitter saw from that pitcher was that quality, was the average quality of that pitcher, and then you look across all of the pitchers that batter faced, does that predict the outcomes of that batter season? And it just decidedly did not. So this was, I think, fairly useful information because, first of all, there was real disparity in the pitch qualities that batters saw. Sorry, in the average pitch. There is disparities in the pitcher quality that batters saw. But if you just assume that pitcher is delivering you a pitch that is average for that pitcher, that doesn't predict batter performance. And this mattered in a more academic way because Baseball Prospectus has this thing called deserved run average for hitters. And what they're doing is controlling for all these variables like park effects, league effects, the weather, apparently. One of the things that they're controlling for is the quality of the pitcher opponent. But they're not controlling for the quality of the pitcher opponent on that day. They're controlling for the quality of that pitcher on average across the season. But what I saw was that pitcher's performance on average across the season, when you sum it all up, has like essentially no effect on the hitter's outcomes. So even though hitters see different quality pitchers slightly, that doesn't really predict their outcomes. Like the difference in hitter ability just significantly outweighs the pitchers that they saw. But this is what I was missing from that analysis. It was, okay, well, maybe not the average pitch that those pitchers delivered throughout the season. Maybe that's not predictive, but maybe the pitches that they saw in individual at-bats actually predicts the outcome. So first things first is I took my Pitching Plus model, which is sort of a mix of Stuff Plus, which is a model that grades pitches just on the stuff features like velocity, spin, movement, and a bunch of other things, but those. And then also location plus, which is where the value of the location at the plate crossing point. It's a mix of those things together, basically. I take all of the features from those, put it together, and that's pitching plus. Before I turn it into a plus, it's just the expected run value. So before I convert it, it's just XRV. Anything below 0 is better than average. Above 0 is worse than average, right? Because you don't want to allow runs. You don't want positive run value. So what I saw was that the pitches. So this model was trained on historical data, which is cool. And then I fit the 2021 data to it. So this model knew nothing about 2021 at all. It just knew something about the relationship between pitch shapes, pitch locations, and outcomes from 2020 and before. But then when I take 2021 and sort of use it to predict novel data, make grade novel data, then what it did was take each pitch that hitters saw, take the grade of it, and then take basically take their WOBA and then take the average grade of the pitches they saw. That predicted 17% of batter outcome. So if you look at the pitcher as a whole that the batter faced, it's not useful information. But if you look at the individual pitches they got, it is useful information. And this is interesting. So I thought, oh, well, maybe it's stuff. Like maybe some guys are getting, nastier stuff thrown at them, and so they're not hitting as well. That wasn't it. So when I used Stuff Plus, the Stuff Plus model, it was not correlated with batter outcomes at all. On the season, it wasn't. I'm sure, like with it, if you have nasty enough stuff, sometimes it will matter. But when I look at Location Plus and ignore the stuff features, that was even more strongly correlated than overall pitching. So basically, what I saw was that good hitters are being pitched around to, and it's actually making them even better offensive performers. Pitchers are like afraid of giving really serious threats good pitches, and that comes up in the data. And it actually predicts 17% of the overall. Like if there's a certain amount of variation across hitters, 17% of that is explained by just where the location of the pitches were. And what's crazy is that it's not like all hitters see the exact same location. They see pretty different. Some get it right down the dick, and they can't hit it, and the pitchers know that, so they deliver that pitch to them.
So then the question that you were asking less had to do with do hitters get better if they see more pitches or certain types of pitches, and so instead it had more to do with, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so basically it was if I could grade a pitch in a vacuum,
mm-hmm.
and say, if you're to throw this infinite number of times, what would the outcomes be? That information explains basically 17% of the outcome. So there's that saying, pitching is 75% of baseball, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe it is, but this model showed that this particular type of grade, which has its own limitations, that this particular type of grade explains 17% of batter outcome. If your definition of batter outcome is WOBA,
right,
which it doesn't have to be, but yeah, that was it. And it was pretty crazy.
So this could one of the conclusions that you draw from the Location Plus is that location also plays a significant role in batter outcomes. And
Definitely.
would it be more so than the stuff?
That's what's crazy. Yes. You can have really nasty stuff and it makes you resilient to pitching right over the plate. It also can be deceptive I love Adam Ottavino because he's such an extreme example. But with 20 inches of horizontal movement on his slider, he can throw it like a foot and a half off the plate, but it looks like it's going to land right in the strike zone. So for him, his nasty stuff makes his pitches more deceptive, and so he gets more swing and miss. And it's not that it makes them resilient to falling over the plate. It's that it just adds that deception. But what I'd say is that the location, for the most part, for most pitchers, most of the time, is the most important thing. There's another finding separate from all this work, which is that location is also the most volatile aspect of pitching. And that sometimes, even with a starter who has a reputation for command, they just don't have it. And then the days they don't have it, they're F.
So the argument that's been going on Twitter about velo or stuff versus location, the people who have been arguing for location are somewhat borne out by the data.
Yes and no, because Here's the thing. The people who are arguing for location are right on a per event basis, per day, per appearance. But how predictive is good command on one day going to be a good command on another day? The thing that remains fairly constant is stuff. And so stuff predicts itself in the future, whereas command comes and goes. And stuff does come and go, somewhat. Like, it's not exactly the same, but it is less volatile than command. And for that reason, if you're hoping to like find someone who has great command, maybe they do that year, but maybe some small injury or nagging thing like makes them not have command ever again. So that's one of the things and it's why I think a lot of teams go for stuff. It isn't just because it's flashy. I think it's because they think they can improve command, whereas they love the stuff, and they don't know if they can improve that on somebody who has good command.
I wonder, does the data actually bear that out? Of like, especially for how seemingly volatile command is, are teams actually, or on the player development side, is it easier to develop command than it is to develop stuff? Because to me, in some ways, especially with where player development is at right now, with Rapsodo, Edgertronic, etc., like we have a much better idea of how to improve somebody's stuff. Same thing with velocity. We have, like with SNC, native ball programs, we have a much better idea of how to develop the stuff. And it seems like we're still struggling to figure out how to get command. And I don't know, because I haven't looked at the data, but like it just seems like command is a much harder thing to develop than it is for, I can put you on a velocity program. I don't know how well or how much people have talked about, like, hey, here's a command program. I have ideas for it. I know, Driveline has some stuff for it, but that's something that it seems like is less talked about. And yeah, so it just makes me wonder,
probably because we don't know how to do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just makes me wonder though, like all right, is it actually better to get somebody with command and then build the engine and like actually develop velocity? Is it better to go for those guys, or is it better to go for guys with stuff and hope that you can teach them command?
It's kind of like bat speed and contact rate. Whereas bat speed is kind of like velo or stuff, and contact rate is kind of like command. And I know it's not a perfect one-to-one comparison, but like the guys with extreme bat speed and just that really hit the ball hard, like the Tyler O'Neills of the world, for instance. Like that dude, when he hits it, when he makes contact, it goes. And now he's hitting it more often, and so it's great. But I feel like the contact rate is only for certain players is it really truly like reliable. Because it can kind of come and go, and when guys don't have it at all, that can be a huge issue. Just like when guys don't have command, they're kind of the Javi Baez of of pitching. So I don't know. I mean, all I can say is what I've seen at the major league level, and that is not just representative of what's happening on college campuses and what's happening, in farm systems and stuff. So, but what I have seen is that year over year correlation in location plus is about half of what it is for stuff plus. So stuff plus predicts itself very well. Like next season stuff is very similar. Next season command, it can wildly swing. Using location plus as my proxy for command. So I don't know, but yeah. Then there are guys like Kyle Hendricks who just kind of got it every year, except for this year apparently.
Yeah, and I mean to build off that at the college level, it's fairly similar. Kind of in my experience touring with our data, like last year, taking last year's stuff data and this year's stuff data, so far, like of the pitchers that returned, their stuff is fairly similar. Whereas command, I mean, it can jump anywhere. And so thankfully, like we have kind of these systems put in place where, hey, this appearance, this game, like you had good command, this appearance, you have bad command. And then again, going back to kind of creating that synergy is, talking with that player. Hey, did you feel like you had good command today? And I mean, usually it matches up where if they say, hey, I didn't have good command today. And, you look at the command plus data, and it'll say, well, yeah, you really didn't. Things along those lines. But I mean, at the college level, there is, in terms of like building stuff and in terms of that like stuff, velo slash stuff versus command debate, there is a steady increase in velo stuff, but then there's a plateau in most cases. Whereas command, as you mentioned earlier, it's volatile. And there is a way you can train it, but it'll take much longer for you to see results than you will with velo and stuff. Velo and stuff, there's like a slight, uptick in those kind of numbers, but then command, it can bounce everywhere, but then there will be a period of time where you'll see that slight uptick, but it'll take much longer. So like if you bring it down to like a junior college level, you might not be able to see those kind of trends at all because
right.
most players are done after 2 years.
Right.
So
it's hard to follow the trends over time.
Yeah, it really is. And especially like when at the college level, like you only have max 4 years. Well, I mean, with COVID, you could have more, but for the most part, like going forward, you'll have max for maybe a fifth year with player the redshirt. But even then, like if the player gets hurt, you're not going to have data on him, so you don't really know. But at the end of the day, like you can only see a certain way, and it's very, very hard. And I honestly don't know of a solution to kind of expedite those processes without just taking that time.
I have a very uninformed hypothesis that command maybe can be taught, but control definitely can. And if not taught, then acquired or improved. You just
How would
see
you
examples
define
of it
those two terms? Because people use them interchangeably.
Yeah, I don't know if there may be other ways of separating the two, but I see command as being able to hit precise locations, and control as being able to hit coarse locations, so in or out of the strike zone generally, is I think the sort of like conventional way of understanding control versus command. And zone rate is probably not a great proxy for control because sometimes you don't want it in the zone. So I don't know. Actually, I don't have a great way of evaluating it. because that requires you to know intent. But there are some things I think that can kind of be used as a loose proxy to understand control versus command. And the 2021 success story in control is Robbie Ray, at the major league level at least. But what you see with him is that his zone rate has increased, but when he hits the zone, the heart rate, the heart of the zone rate also increases. And to me, that says he's saying, fuck it. Sorry, you might have to bleep that out. He's saying, screw it. I'm going to throw it over the heart of the plate, and it's not going to arrive there because I don't have. It's just going to spray somewhere. And if you just watch his at bats, watch him go through at bats, they'll set up right in the middle all the time, and it just ends up on the edge. And so he's kind of like, I'm going to end up half a foot away, like 10 inches away or whatever, for my target on average anyway. And so it's not going to hit the middle. So I'm fine. And it's totally worked out for him. And that seemed to be more of a mental thing. He's not trying to hit specific zones. It's kind of the opposite of that, the saying from the Patriot, aim small, miss small. It's like aim big, miss small. That's kind of what it seems like. And if he just stopped worrying about trying to hit exactly this little spot, and it was just, I'm going to sling it. But of course, that only really works if you have certain type of stuff, I think.
Well, that kind of, you illustrate why it's hard to figure out the intent of where a pitcher's trying to throw the ball, because for some guys, you could just simply look at where the catcher is setting up. And for other guys, that may be where they need to intend to throw the ball, but they know that that's going to put the ball where they actually want it.
Right.
And so that's where looking at the catcher can be difficult. I mean, it reminds me of, to your point, it depends on the player's stuff, because one of my friends, he was a closer, and he had, I believe it was a sinker or a cutter, but either way, he would always throw it right to the middle of the zone and let the movement take care of things. And that's what allowed him to be successful, is just to aim for the middle and let his pitch do what it's going to do. So that's where it really does.
The Rays do.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I think it becomes hard. Like you said, which are you going to look at, command or control? And to your point, that it's probably easier to teach control than it is command. And so, I mean, because that's why actually I find catching interesting. And it was always fun for me, because my job, I felt like, was to help the pitcher throw the ball where he wanted it. And that sometimes meant setting up not where he wanted it or where I wanted it. It was somewhere different, so that the ball would end up where we wanted it to be.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. And yet another piece of the catcher's game that we have no way of evaluating. Really, really just love catchers.
No, absolutely we do. But real quick, it kind of leads to that, accuracy versus precision debate. Would you rather be accurate or precise? And then, like Garrett alluded to it, it's hard to be like, let's look at the catcher's target. Some guys, will be like, hey, let's hit that spot, or B will be like, no, I'm just going to throw it over the plate and let my movement take care of the rest. But it kind of leads to kind of this interesting ideology in terms of why not focus on just focal points, or just have a guy that say, hey, aim for this. Look at in a certain case, look at wherever the catcher sets up. Let's say the catcher sets up low and away to a left-handed hitter. Look at his, let's say it's a right-handed pitcher. You want to throw you have a sinker, so you want to throw it away. Hey, look at his right shoulder in this case. and just be like, hey, aim to throw it at that and let the movement take the rest. And I think that's another big thing. And as you mentioned, like if you want to teach control in this case, like that's one solution there is just find a focal point. Because I know, like,
Yeah, it seems like a sort of a what's the word? It's like a psychological process more than it is a mechanical one, I think. It, it's about thinking. I mean, I don't know. Look, I I don't have data on this, so I don't know. And that's the fun thing about working at Driveline, I'm sure, is you got to test all this crap.
yeah,
But yeah,
oh yeah,
but that's the thing is because it's a mental and physical exercise, and mental and physical process. The I think mental side could play like such a huge role as to like kind of, you know, pencil over the physical side. If you've already got, you know, like you're throwing how you throw, you've got your delivery, you like your delivery, you like the way the ball comes out of your hands, you just have a hard time putting it somewhere. If you just think big, then just like I'm not worrying about precise locations anymore. I'm just thinking big picture. I feel like that's what I feel like, I don't know this, but I really feel like that's what they did with the Rays. They said, we're at a ballpark where, you know, almost nothing goes out of the park. The ballpark itself is going to help you out, pitcher. So don't worry about it, Tyler Glasnow. Just throw it right down the middle or try to, and then it's going to end up on the corners like 40% of the time. And when it's down the middle, you throw 98 and it'll probably be okay.
98 with a high spin, yeah, you'll be fine.
Yeah, you'll be fine. You've got that deceptive curveball and you add the slider to it. But like, yeah, I mean, oh, I do think big picture sort of things are probably easier to coach too, you know, as opposed to like this little change, you know, in your grip. Like I'm sure that comes to play at certain points. Mostly it's got to be just like, you know,
Just
changing your mentality, simplify the game.
yeah, and a lot of it is truly mentality based. Because at the end of the day, like I know for our guys specifically, like the guys that are doing well have a good mentality. You know, they if they go
Right,
behind 1-0,
right,
2-0, they're
right.
like, I can still do this. Not, hey man, like, oh man, I'm down 2-0. Like it's done. It's over. I'm
Right.
either gonna give up a home run or walk someone. But a lot of it is just having that self confidence. And I know like it's weird, you know, hearing that from an analyst perspective, but yeah, like there you just got to be confident in yourself. Like you have to know, like, hey, I have this stuff, and I
Yeah.
can do whatever I want with it. I can strike out the world with it, and that's really all you need.
Yeah. Get out there and kill.
Oh
So-
yeah,
So I got one more big question, I suppose, and then I want to be respectful of your time, and then give Robert one more opportunity to throw something in there too. So, you had another tweet, and this was actually, I think, the impetus where I was like, you know what, I really got to talk to Max. Been following your stuff for a little while, and it was like, oh, this might be an interesting one too, because Robert and I have talked a lot about this of looking at from a hitter's perspective, can you actually hit balls through holes? And so your tweet thread or Twitter thread about spray angle kind of got me interested in this, in kind of that idea of like, how much does spray angle and where we hit the ball on the field actually play into how well or how successful we potentially can be as hitters? And so I'm kind of curious what your analysis looking at spray angle, kind of what things that you took away from that.
Yeah, that was quite the rabbit hole that I did not expect to be. You know, spray angle on any one event is very important, of course. And what I saw was if all you look at is spray angle, and are looking across different launch angles and exit velocities, the XBA, or expected batting average, was basically this flat line at whatever, batting average on contact is. And then it dips off on pole side. Sorry, it dips off on oppo side because you have less exit velocity, so you can't hit it as hard. But in reality, the actual batting average is like this sine wave where there's like peaks and troughs, and you have higher batting average where the players aren't positioned in terms of spray angle, and then lower where they are. So the finding there was that XBA, that sometimes people online will mention in relation to an individual batted ball event, is useless. Like, I don't care what the expected batting average is of that ball if you hit it directly at third baseman. I don't care because you hit it directly at the third baseman. I care what it is if it was like launched into the air a little bit and then somebody made like an amazing catch like that. That's useful. Anyway, so I thought, okay, well, it's useful in predicting, like having spray angle is useful in predicting an individual event. Describing the probability of individual events. You have more precision if you include spray angle. But is spray angle something hitters can control? We know that pole percent is similar, but there are different distributions than just pole percent. Than just the amount that the percentage, the proportion of balls that you pull. You could have like some, there's some hitters that have like even distribution across the field. Some that hit a lot straight away. Some that hit a lot oppo. And so what I did is I wanted to look at basically like how sticky are the spray angle distributions for hitters? Like to what degree is this something that is generally like a skill that they retain over a year, or maybe not a skill, but like a quality of a hitter's hitting profile that is retained over the years. And I showed that for like 99% of players, their spray angle distribution was not statistically different year over year. And so it like didn't really change. So you might think, well, then maybe these models of XBA should include spray angle. Because if that's a batter skill and it's not just straight up luck, well, then you should include it. So I made a model that did include it, and then looked to see whether I could predict future performance better with it. And I couldn't. It made no sense. So like spray angle is a retained talent, but using XBA from the previous year did not predict next year XBA. And it was also true of XWOBA versus next year's WOBA when I include spray angle. It did not improve the predictiveness of my model by adding that third variable. So what I learned is like in this, it doesn't really like these things don't make logical sense when you put it all together. You've got this spray angle distribution, like where they sprayed the ball, their spray tendencies basically, is like a retained skill, but using that information to get an XWOBA does not make XWOBA or XBA more predictive of the next year. And I think it's because it's just too granular. Like you don't want to look at individual events. You want to look at tendencies and then compute the full probability distribution over all possible events for that player. So anyway, that's a little long, but like what I'm trying to say here is that I think that obviously this is an important skill that is not part of expected batting average. And whenever you see somebody online be like, oh man, that had an expected batting average of like 0.75 or whatever, don't listen to them. because it did. But only in this extremely useless vacuum where you don't know where the players are positioned, where you don't know what the spray angle was. And that context, I think, informs hitters' hitting decisions and is not part of that model, and therefore makes the model very not so useful in describing that individual event.
Right, because
That's pretty much it.
there's times where someone hits a blooper that falls in front of the outfielders and the infielders going back, and you look at it, you're like, how does that have an XBA of like 620? Well, it's because again, it's not dependent of position. It's because they're hit there and there's nobody playing there.
Yeah, and also a lot of bloopers actually have fairly high XBA, or even when you include the third variable of spray angle, because there's that like little gap, between where the outfielders are and where the infielders are, and like, man, if you can just like, you'll see teams go down, you'll see sad endings to games where you're up like 2 runs or 3 runs or whatever.
A little bloop.
But I wouldn't. So even though those bloops like aren't like the ability to hit those bloops is kind of varies from season to season for most players, doesn't mean that hitting them there is useless. Like, it's totally useful to hit them there. And one other thing that gets me angry, and I feel like it's a misuse of it doesn't really get me angry. It's just like me. I don't understand why people look at it this way. Is they'll see a blooper and they're like, just luck, and I'm like, no, dude, they hit that there with a bat. That pitch came at 95 miles an hour, and that is a fairly high batting average zone. So shut up. Stop complaining about the blooper. That was a talent, and they did it. Good for them.
And that's where I look back at like Ichiro and the skill that he had with the bat. And this is where, to me, learning how to be able to actually do something like that with your bat to a certain pitch is actually highly valuable, especially in certain contexts. And it makes me think of like, because we've gotten so interested in exit velo and launch angle, not that launch angle doesn't play in here, or exit velo, but just in maxing out or idealizing for the home run, which I'm not against that, but it just makes me think of tennis more, because some of the coolest feats of athleticism in tennis are sometimes when one of the players just barely taps it over the net and puts some sort of spin on it. And that is, to me, a great demonstration of being highly skilled. And so,
yes,
I think
is a great example. Just great.
Mr. Sleep with his bat at night, Mr. Apologize to the bat makers when he slammed his bat down one time. Oh, it's great.
I'm a group of fan of the Dodgers, and so I still watch a lot of Dodgers, and it's really amazing. Every team runs on them. Every team. And I think I'd have to look this up, and I could be totally wrong, but I think they have the worst stolen base percent, of attempted in baseball. And they have many that are attempted. So there's both volume and rates that are not good for them. And I know part of this actually probably is a consequence of other teams looking at the pop time metrics for the Dodgers and seeing that they're not very good. But then the other part of it is that I think that the Dodgers kind of forgot about stolen base, and they haven't really spent this season at least addressing this glaring issue across many of their pitchers. And so in a way, it's kind of like it seems like they got a little bit kind of caught up in their own idea of efficiency, and then other teams sort of then a new inefficiency. Maybe not inefficiency, but then a vulnerability emerged on the team. That's what it seems like. And now they've got to address it, because it's been a problem, and it's actually led to several losses this year. So yeah, I do think that there can be, you can very much fall in your circle of what you see as the most predictable, and then try to build your team using that sort of known quantity of predictiveness. But there are bubbles and gaps of information that or things that can hurt you a bit. Not to say that the Dodgers have been bad. Obviously, they've been very good this season. but that's a weakness, and a smart team would try to address any weakness.
Are they just trying to make it fair for everybody else? I mean, because they are so good.
Yeah, they don't want to. Are they trying to not be a 120 win team every year? Is that why they're doing it?
Doesn't seem like it. They're certainly spending the money on becoming a very, very talented team.
So, Max, the other thing that I kind of wanted to ask you about is in terms of like an analyst perspective, what kind of enjoyment do you get out of running all these models? Do you ever sit in a game and like you mentioned earlier with the stolen bases, like do you ever sit there and be like, hey, let's test out this idea that I have?
Yeah, all the inspiration comes from watching baseball. My satisfaction in general comes from learning a bit more about the game. And I think that part of the reason I post these things online is that the process of building the models, running them, attempting to answer questions with them or ask new questions with them is, of course, understanding from that. But then in making these public, also getting feedback and learning from the community of really, really smart, interesting, baseball obsessed people. And I think that's it. It's a fun social experience. I really like talking baseball with like anybody who will talk about it. And it's a infinitely complex, dynamic game that changes in response to changes, that then changes again in response to changes, and it's that endless loop of upgrades and the cat and mouse game that will make it so that you can never solve the riddle, because the riddle is always changing, I think.
Awesome. Well, to wrap up, do you have any resources that you would recommend for folks?
Yeah. If you are looking to get into fairly advanced programmatic type analytics, there is a book by Jim Albert called, I think it's called either Exploring Baseball Data with R or Analyzing Baseball Data with R. There are two editions. The second one is the one, if you're going to get this book, that's the one you should get, because it's updated with essentially with what's called the tidy, compliant type programming. But anyway, this does two things. This book will teach you how to program in R, and starts very simple, and then sort of grows out to become more complex, and not just in terms of the complexity of the programming itself, but also in the type of baseball questions that it's attempting to address. I read through that whole thing, ran through all of the examples. I love that book. Jim Albert is awesome. He also has a blog called, I think the blog is called Exploring Baseball Data with R, that he updates probably once every 2 to 4 weeks. And yeah, he's like this. I feel like nobody talks about his work, and he does so much cool stuff. So I would suggest, if you're interested in learning, baseball analyses in and R at the same time, it's a perfect marriage of those things in that book. And if you're interested in some of the, quirkier statistical analyses, his blog is great too. So apparently my suggestions are all just Jim Albert.
Love it.
Sounds good. And where can people find you and follow your work?
Oh, I'm just a Twitter demon. I spend probably too much time just on it, posting on it, whatever. So my Twitter handle is choice_fielder. And that's it. I don't have a website. I don't have any of that. I don't have anything else. I just post my stuff on there.
That's all you need is a Twitter.
I guess so.
So I don't know if I'll include this, but people should go follow you and digest all the stuff that you have, because it might not be there in a couple of months.
Yep. Well, nothing's coming down. I'm not taking any of it down. But when I start, I won't be posting as often. Yeah. And it'll probably just be like, the occasional poking my head in type thing.
Well, people, head over there and check out Max's stuff and enjoy it while it lasts.
Yes. And please do enjoy it. It's been a thrill ride lately.
I'm glad you like it. I appreciate it. I'm glad we got a chance to talk.
Awesome. I'm so glad too.
All right. Well, hope you guys enjoyed this.